Welcome everyone, this is the Mysteries Abound podcast, episode 59. This is your host Paul, and this episode is entitled Strictly Paranormal Tales. Set 1. If you listen to my Origins podcast, you'll know that I have done a couple of episodes entitled Longer Tales. This is where I do longer stories rather than the shorter stories that I normally do with the Origins podcast. It's just a variation that I like to do every now and then. And I thought, why not do one with the Mysteries Abound podcast as well? So these episodes are going to be strictly paranormal tales. No mysteries from science or archaeology or anywhere else like that, just paranormal tales. And what better to start off this episode 1 of the Strictly Paranormal Tales than a couple of original stories submitted by one of my listeners. I received this email the other day from one of my listeners who does prefer to remain anonymous. I'm sure, however, they wouldn't mind me reading just a small excerpt from the email before I get on to the 2 stories that they've given me. While I am a firm believer in science, I have had quite a few experiences with the paranormal. Being a police officer, my feet are firmly planted in the pragmatic world of evidence and proof. I cannot, however, discount what I have seen and felt with my 5 senses, which has led to an intense interest in the world of the unexplained. Although I cannot fully explain the phenomena I have experienced, I truly believe that the experiences were real. Story 1. Haunted Hike. My wife and I are avid hikers and often spend our holidays backpacking around the Canadian national parks. On one such trip in 2010, we decided that we would hike a popular trail on the shore of Lake Minnewanka in Jasper National Park, Alberta. Our chosen destination was a campsite approximately 10 kilometres away from the trailhead. Our plan was to hike to the site where we would set up a base camp and spend the next 2 days hiking to various ridges in the surrounding mountains. We left for the site just prior to noon and hiked for approximately 5 hours to reach it. The hike was uneventful and we were glad to pass several streams crossing the table as we could refill our water bottles and remain hydrated. The most notable of these streams was also the largest. It was approximately 500 metres from our campsite, and we used it to fill up our water bottles just before making camp. Upon our arrival at camp at approximately 1700 hours, we found it was completely deserted. No one else had chosen to hike to this camp, and this is just how we liked it, surrounded by the peace and tranquility of nature. Knowing that the next camp was approximately 15 kilometres away, we felt comfortable that we would be the only ones to sleep there that night. We went about setting up our tent and choosing a spot sufficiently far away from our sleeping area to serve as our kitchen. In bear country, it is not wise to cook near where you sleep, as the sense of cooked food can attract bears. Although the campsite was quite flat and dotted with game trails amongst the low scrub brush, both my wife and I noted that the camp felt very closed and dark. Neither of us could explain this feeling, as the west side of the camp bordered on a massive rock beach, which gave a great view of the lake and the surrounding mountains. The trails in the camp were another oddity that we noted. My wife and I found that despite being able to see between each portion of the camp, the trails seemed to change in length as we made our way from the cooking to the sleeping areas. Throughout the evening we travelled the same trail many times. Each time it seemed that the time it took to make the trip changed. Although we never measured the time each trip took, we felt the time was different each trip. Sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. On one particular trip from the tent to the kitchen, I came across a large deer skull sitting in the middle of the trail. This struck me as very odd, as I had travelled the trail many times during the evening and had not noticed the skull. I took very little notice of this, however, as I was quite hungry and looking forward to dinner. I picked up the skull and set it on the picnic table in our kitchen area. After eating, my wife and I were quite tired and we decided to go to bed about 2100 hours. I fell asleep quite quickly, tired from the long hike and camp setup. During my sleep I had a very vivid dream. In the dream I awoke and left the tent. Outside the tent I found several massive fires which appeared to be burning in pits. These fires appeared to be burning whole trees which had had their branches stripped. As I watched the fires, convinced I was awake, I looked past the fires and saw a bear staring at me from the tree line. The bear rose up on its hind legs and began to run towards me. Petrified, I could do nothing but stand still as the bear approached. As it was on top of me, I closed my eyes and braced myself for the attack. My dream ended before I was attacked, and I awoke in a cold sweat, still in the tent. I looked over at my wife in the darkness, and she appeared to be sleeping peacefully. Looking at my watch, I noted that the time was about 300 hours. As I lay awake, trying to figure out the dream I had just experienced, I became aware of the sounds surrounding me. Outside the tent, I could hear the waves washing up on the pebble beach, but as I listened, I could also hear the sounds of footsteps on the beach. These footfalls were distinct and separate from the waves, and sounded quite a bit closer to the tent than the waves. As I listened, it sounded as if whatever was making these sounds was walking in slowly past us. And because our tent was only about 15 metres from the beach, I surmised that whoever or whatever was walking on the beach couldn't be any further than 10 metres away, as I heard no splashes associated with the footsteps. Thinking that this could be an animal, I was not initially shocked by the sound, but as I listened closer, I began to realise that whatever was making the footsteps was not our only visitor that night. While I was straining to track the sound of the footsteps in my head, I suddenly became aware of the crackle of a fire, also near the tents, but on the other side of us. This sound was distinct, and I recognised it immediately, having been an avid outdoorsman for the majority of my life. My mind raced, trying to figure out if I was dreaming or not, and I suddenly realised that I was now quite scared and quite awake. With the unmistakable sound of the crackling fire came the sounds that one would expect in a situation involving a campfire. But these were also the most two terrifying sounds I have ever heard. That of people talking and food cooking. I slowly realised that I could hear the voices of women talking and children laughing as they ran around the tent. Although I could not make out any distinct words, I could clearly hear the sounds of adults speaking with one another. These conversations were punctuated by the shouts of children yelling and laughing happily as they played. I could also make out the sounds of little footsteps as these children ran about, perhaps playing a game of chase or tag. I noted the sound of food sizzling on a pan being flipped and beginning to sizzle more. Again I strained to figure out what the source of these sounds was. They were as clear as day to me, but also very foreign. In my mind, it was very unlikely that a group of hikers had decided to set up camp in such a remote location at 3 a.m. Being a cop, my first instinct is always to investigate and confront the unknown. On this occasion, however, something told me to stay in the tent. Part of me desperately wanted to investigate, but something about the sounds told me that I wouldn't like what I found, or more importantly, what I found wouldn't like me. Succumbing to my fears, I remained in my tent, listening to the sounds of children playing and food cooking on open fires for about an hour. At about 0400 hours, as suddenly as these sounds had started, they stopped, and I was able to fall into a broken, fitful sleep. My wife and I both awoke at about 800 hours as per our usual routine. I decided not to say anything to her about my experience as I was still processing it. The day was bright and warm, and I noted as I exited the tent that our camp was just as we left it, with no other people or any other indication of human visitors. As my wife and I ate a quiet breakfast, she suddenly turned to me and asked, "Did you hear the children playing last night? What about women cooking on a fire?" Flabbergasted, I could not speak, but the look on my face told her everything she needed to know. Deciding that we had outstayed our welcome, we packed up our camp and began to hike out, electing to fill our water bottles from the large stream that we had passed on the way in. Upon reaching the location of the stream, we now saw that what had been a rather large and fast-moving body of water less than 24 hours earlier was now a bone-dry rock bed. Whatever had visited us the previous night obviously wanted us to make a quick exit. We returned to our vehicle and have never been back to that particular location. I'm going to save the second one of these paranormal tales from our listener to later in the podcast. In the interim, The Day the Creek Disappeared by Anita Holmes, and it's from the paranormal.about.com website. Along with my family, I've experienced what I believe to be two alternate reality type space-time slips. It took place on a never-to-be-found-again Oregon beach. The second occurred in southern Utah, near a high mountain stretch known as Duck Creek. After my husband's untimely death from kidney cancer in 1992, I relocated my family from eastern Oregon to New Harmony, Utah. This tiny little burg is just 15 miles south of Cedar City and 30 miles north of the state's banana belt, St. George. How I loved my years there. To the west was the Great Pine Mountain, and to the east the western rim of the Zion National Park, where the massive Navajo sandstone formation known as Kolob's Fingers burns red in the evening sun. Surrounded by national parks, the kids and I could jump in the car with a picnic lunch, and within 60 minutes be settled at any number of incredible sights. Red cliffs, turquoise lake waters, in a stand of aspens at Cedar Breaks, or along the shores of Duck Creek on Cedar Mountain. One of our favourite picnic treks was just off Highway 14, heading up Cedar Mountain east of Cedar City. Between Cedar City and Duck Creek, at the crest of Highway 14, there is exactly one road that heads north off of 14. It will eventually take you to Panguitch Lake. We enjoyed exploring along this road, and a few miles from the Highway 14 intersection, we would often stop at a creek at the foot of a hilltop clothed in aspen. There was a metal plaque mounted next to the creek near the road, sharing a brief history of the area. Over the years, we spent many a summer afternoon, blanket spread out next to the creek, picnic basket filled with oven-fried chicken, homemade brownies, potato salad and soft drinks. We'd hike up to the aspens, swish bare feet in the ice-cold creek, and just plain enjoy the solitude, soft breezes and sunshine of our special spot on Cedar Mountain. The summer before I left Utah to teach in the Alaskan bush, June 1998, friends from Juneau came to visit. One afternoon we loaded up the car with kids and my trusty old picnic basket to explore Cedar Mountain. Before hiking Cedar Breaks and sloshing in Duck Creek, we planned on eating our lunch along that little creek off Highway 14. But that's when things got strange. We couldn't find it. We spent 90 minutes driving up and down the length of that northerly road 3 times and could not find the creek. The hilltop aspen grove was there, but the little bridge crossing the creek, the post-mounted plaque, and that bloomin' creek were nowhere to be found. We finally settled for eating a belated lunch at Duck Creek. I was flabbergasted at our inability to find the creek. To date, we have not been back up Cedar Mountain to have another shot at locating it. The next year we moved to Alaska, where I completed my full-time teaching career in 2011. But one day I will definitely travel back up Highway 14, east of Cedar City, and try to determine which reality is currently extant. The one with the creek, or without it. By the way, we have photos of me, the kids, and our remarkable old hybrid wolf sitting smack dab along the rims of the creek as proof that it was indeed there. And from the www.creepypasta.com website. Null. Shortly after turning 12, my family moved to a much larger, albeit older house. I had my choice of 3 bedrooms. Being the oldest does have its perks, and resolved to bunker down in the basement. The decision was based on isolation and being able to hear my parents coming downstairs. The walk-in closet was just an added bonus. I developed the habit of leaving my bedroom spotless and inflicting all of my chaotic nature within the confines of the walk-in closet. Legos, action figures, and even a small assortment of black and white 70s pornography pamphlets became scattered in what I would describe as a pubescent fortress. At one point my younger brother and I nearly burned down a barn. The consequences of this action was the removal and destruction of all toys we had. Naturally, some of the things found in my closet prompted a stern conversation and 3 months of being grounded to my room. The only time I was permitted to leave the house was with a parent or to attend school. For someone that age to have their belongings stolen away and kept in a nearly empty room for extended periods of time, I can assure you it requires a great deal of medication or an imagination to remain sane. I had the luxury of both. At some point my mother took pity on my hermit-like plight and brought me along for some yard sale adventures. I had no money, and to be honest it was odd to be around people I did not know. I gave them ample space. At some time while performing this awkward dance, my shin met a firm object jutting out slightly under one of the sale tables. It was a small computer, an ancient all-in-one Apple. I pointed this find out, and the shabby system fell into my possession, courtesy of my mother. The system was accompanied by a small weathered box full of discs and cables, most of which were not usable. I took my time erecting a shrine in the closet to house my treasure. Milk cartons and overly discovered Where's Waldo books served as the frame for my makeshift desk. I paused to admire the system and jabbed my finger at the power button. A fan somewhere within its guts growled to life and gradually sank into a purr of white noise. The screen, however, remained blank. My heart sank and I waited anxiously for several minutes before giving up. My technical know-how was far from adequate to revive the patient, so I left the hunched system humming to itself and embedded the rest of my evening with reading and homework. The sun gradually bled behind the mountains and disappeared, signalling it was time for bed. My parents' sleep schedule was enforced heavily. I always slept well in the dark. The darkness has had a calming effect on me, and I think part of that stems from being the eldest and not being terrorised. One thing that does upset my sleep in any situation is light. Perhaps I have thin eyelids. Perhaps I open my eyes when I dream. Regardless, I found my eyes flickering open towards the source of my unwanted illumination. Consciousness regained with increasing puzzlement at what I saw. The closet door was closed, but a distinct green hue snuck out from under it. The brightness was increasing and decreasing at random intervals. Pandering to my curiosity, I rose from bed and shuffled towards the closet. I was barely conscious enough to evade the mess of books and homework debris. Before my hand had touched the cold knob, I knew what to suspect. The door opened to reveal a working computer with a monotone display. The screensaver looked like pixels attempting to eat one another. I would later learn that it was called Life, the screensaver. That night I set aside the urge to sleep and explored the storage of my newfound source of entertainment. One night of sleeplessness turned into several. I was excited every night to feign my slumber until the shuffling upstairs would die out to dive into my closet to entertain myself. Faceless floppies would yield to games, books, papers, pictures, and even a few nudes. I was approaching 15 games, and the box still had a large supply of discs to go. I found a word program that allowed me to keep a diary, a drawing tool to make simple sketches, and other useful things to occupy my time. For someone who had access to such a thing only during school time, this was fantastic. School became a blur of daydreams and naps. I quickly adjusted to my new nocturnal obsession. 5 weeks into my 3 months of being grounded, I slowly grew aware of a numb feeling. I no longer felt despair in secluding myself. I could go days without more than a few sentences uttered, and found the void of communication being swallowed up by my diary and the pictures I drew. Thursday night that week, I plopped down in front of the green screen and fumbled in the dark for more discs inside the frail computer box. This disc was different from the rest, in that it was marked Null in large black permanent swatches. After about a minute of loading the screen, it began to shift and contort in ways I thought impossible. My mind noted the swirls and the tidal artichoke before a swift blackness fell over me. I could hear a high-pitched squeal sounding from somewhere. My initial thought was that the computer display had finally died. I stood on my feet, wobbled, and held a doorknob to the exit from my closet for a few moments. I found myself standing in a room filled with natural sunlight. The window well allowed just enough sunlight to spill through my blinds and cast shadowy stripes over everything. Puzzled, I made my way upstairs and joined my family for dinner. "What's with the PJs?" I blink up at my father and muster a weak shrug. "Dinner is ready. Go find your brother." "Dinner?" I question weakly. He nods and returns his attention back to the news, rocking in his slick leather chair. I turn to go upstairs and instead take a slight right, heading back to my room. I push open the door and beeline to the ajar closet door and fling it open. The action required to throw open a door drains me significantly. I stand in the doorway, staring down at an empty patch of carpet where the computer once sat. No box, no discs, no computer. I later learned over dinner that I've somehow lost a month of awareness. Both my dogs have died, and my grades are beyond salvage. I asked my father about the computer on several occasions, and every time he comments how I walked out with it one day and returned a couple of hours later, minus the system, and barefoot. Of course, I cannot recall a single bloody thing. In Hollywood ghost stories, the spirits are nearly always malevolent. For dramatic purposes, the vengeful ghosts are intent on causing harm to the living, either by attacking them physically or scaring them so badly that they want to jump out of a window. The reality is that ghost and haunting phenomena are harmless, for the most part. Residual haunting, the kind that are seen to be recordings on the environment, simply play themselves out. True spirits or intelligent haunting are either those who manifest to relay a message or are trapped entities whom may not know they are dead. Very rarely, however, do they attack people. There are famous cases of physical attacks, most notably the Bell Witch haunting and the entity that tormented Esther Cox in Amherst, Nova Scotia. But these are usually classified as poltergeist phenomena, which probably arise from the subconscious of the person or people involved. So, can ghosts attack? Consider the following cases. And these tales come from the paranormal.about.com website. Slapped by a ghost. How would you like to be roused from sleep like this? One night I was awakened by a violent slap on the left side of my face, says Elizabeth, like with someone's open hand. Elizabeth at first thought it was her prankster sister, but then saw by the clock that it was 1:27 a.m. and her sister was sound asleep in another room. And the attack wasn't over. I felt pulling on my hair so much that it jerked my head around. Then my down comforter started to be pulled down, or at least it felt like it. Elizabeth wanted to scream, but felt paralysed. The ghost apparently wanted her attention. Elizabeth then heard a woman's voice say, "Listen to me, listen to me," and the pleas faded off into the darkness. Nasty little ghost. Mary Ann A. also felt the slap of a ghostly hand in 2005 at her aunt's house in Batangas, Philippines. Her attack was preceded by a sighting of the alleged assailant. Mary Ann was relaxing on her aunt's bench swing when she saw a small girl in a red dress peeking out of her aunt's front door. And when the toddler realised Mary Ann saw her, she ducked inside. Mary Ann assumed it was the child of a visitor, but when she checked, there was no one in the house except her aunt and her aunt's sleeping child, who was not wearing red. Mary Ann dismissed the incident as her imagination and returned to the swing for an afternoon nap. Exhaustion plus cool wind sent me into a deep sleep, she says, only to be awakened by a hard slap from a small hand. As I opened my eyes, I was expecting to see my aunt's kid. I was shocked to find no one with me. Pushed down the stairs. Getting slapped is one thing, and getting shoved down some stairs where you could possibly break your neck is quite another. Yet that's what happened to Melanie S. in 1982 while at Gentleman Jim's restaurant, now Ashley's of Rockledge, in Rockledge, Florida. The restaurant had a reputation for being haunted by the ghost of a woman who had been murdered on the nearby railroad tracks in the 1920s. Melanie was there on a double date with friends and were hoping to catch a glimpse of something otherworldly. We did see the lamp over the salad bar sway continuously all night, she says, so we were pleased and felt that we had gotten our money's worth. Melanie was soon to get more than her money's worth, however. As we were getting ready to go down the stairs, I told my date to get in front of me because I was known to be a klutz and didn't want to fall down the stairs, Melanie says. So they all got in front of me. We were all making jokes about the ghost and feeling pretty frisky. As we were going down the stairs, I felt a huge shove against my back and fell down the stairs, my wonderful companions moving aside to let me make my way down on my own. Looking back up the stairs, Melanie could see clearly that there had been no one behind her that could have shoved her. No one living, that is. The tripping ghost. Cassie B also had an unpleasant experience on a staircase. She and her husband were visiting her older brother's house during the Christmas holidays. Her brother-in-law had warned her that the house was haunted, which she didn't mind because she had been in haunted houses before. But then he revealed that the spirit liked to push people down the stairs. Sure enough, the ghost didn't disappoint. I was coming downstairs to look for my husband when all of a sudden I felt like someone pushed my feet out from under me. I ended up falling down the first 4 stairs, Cassie says. Everyone came running to make sure I was okay. They asked me what happened, and I said it felt like someone pushed my legs out from under me, and I just fell down the stairs. Charlie Hartwell's revenge. As rare as ghost attacks are, being shoved on a stairway is one of the most common occurrences, and a number of people also report the feeling of being strangled. This usually happens at night. Char reports that this happened to his father when they were living in a house in Pepperell, Massachusetts, a place they long considered haunted. The family felt it was the ghost of old Charlie Hartwell, a farmer who once lived on the property and died in a fire. The family had a number of strange incidents: unexplained banging on the walls and doors, TVs, radios and lights going on and off by themselves, tools going missing then reappearing, sliding doors opening by themselves to let the dog out, lights in the barn where there is no electricity, and more. Our ghost Charlie liked to scare my sister for some reason and really didn't like my dad, Char says. One time he was sleeping and he said he felt something on top of him and then it started to strangle him. My dad couldn't get up and he started to cry because he was so scared. He held on to his cross that he was wearing and started praying, and then it went away. Shadow at the inn. Roger had a close call with a shadow person that he felt was trying to attack him, and this was in the middle of the afternoon. Back in 1967, Roger was a college student working for the summer at a large motel in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Roger lived with several other employees at an old stone house a few miles down the road where a brutal murder had allegedly taken place. It was a bright sunny Saturday afternoon when Roger was in his bedroom trying to catch a quick nap. I remember the events clearly, Roger says. I looked at my clock and it was 1 p.m. as I lay down on my bed and closed my eyes. Instantly I was flushed with extreme fear as I opened my eyes. Then out of the wall on this bright and sunny day came a black shadow man with arms outstretched towards me. Its shape changed slightly as it left the wall and drifted towards me. It was a full torso about 6 feet tall. I uttered a gasp and again closed my eyes for an instant. I opened them again and it was still drifting towards me, the arms outstretched as if to choke me. I was paralysed with fear and gave another and louder gasp. It came to within 3 to 4 feet of me, then dissipated. The laughing attacker. A reader using the name Haunted Michigan also reports an attack by a shadow person, this occurring in 2008 at a casino in Michigan. She was staying at the casino hotel with her 2 small children and her brother and his wife. I awoke around 3:30 in the morning to the sensation of a pressure on my side, kind of pushing me down, she says. I thought it might be one of my daughters pushing me down. I raised my arm out to try to push off whatever was on top of me. I felt something substantial, but definitely not either one of my kids. I began to get frightened. I was lying on my side, so I turned my head to my right shoulder to get a glimpse of what was on top of me. I saw a large dark funnel of no substantial shape. I heard a mocking laugh. I struggled to no avail. I decided to let the entity know that they should get off me in the name of Jesus Christ. The funnel suddenly hit the ceiling and disappeared. And finally, the beating. What's more terrifying than being attacked by some unseen entity? One of your children being attacked by some unseen entity. That's what happened some years ago, according to Yolanda, who lived with her 4 children in an ordinary 4-bedroom home in Germantown, Pennsylvania. One night, about 10:30, Yolanda was home only with her 14-year-old daughter, Tiffany, who was sound asleep in the back room. I walked to the bathroom, and on the way out I noticed her door cracked just a little, Yolanda says. I paid it no mind and headed back to my bedroom and relaxed, until I was startled by her door slamming loudly. I yelled her name twice and got no response. Then the horror began. Before I could get up off the bed, I heard her screaming, "Get off of me!" I ran into her bedroom to find her lying in the dark, shaking and trembling. I asked her what happened, and she said that someone was beating her. She had scratches all over her arm. I knew no one was in the house but 2 of us. Yolanda soon moved her family out of that house, a place she later learned where 5 people had overdosed on drugs in the back room. And the final story for the first episode of Strictly Paranormal Tales, from our listener to the Mysteries Abound podcast, his second tale, Unknown Visitors. Before meeting my wife, I lived in a small but adequate house which I rented from my aunt and uncle, who are both realtors. Another tenant rented the basement of the home, which was a separate suite. She was an older lady, and we'll call her Jane for this story. Jane and I got along well, often having coffee or meals together, and she would often ask me to help her out with fixing odds and ends in her suite. Because of our relationship and proximity to one another, we generally didn't knock on each other's doors, but simply opened the door to the other suite and called out to the other person. On one particular night I was working nights and had jumped out of bed at about 1500 hours. My normal routine was to put the coffee on, jump in the shower, and head into the gym before my shift. This particular day was no different. I had put the coffee on and proceeded to have a shower. About halfway through my shower, I heard what I can only describe as a frantic pounding on the bathroom door. The pounding was very loud and lasted for about 5 seconds. Thinking that Jane was in trouble, I grabbed my towel and jumped out of the shower, not even bothering to shut the water off. Throwing open the door and seeing no one was there, I thought that Jane must have gone back into her suite. I quickly put on my pants and a shirt and ran down to Jane's suite. As per our custom, and because I thought she would be expecting me, I didn't knock. I just went inside, calling her name. The suite was empty. There was no one there. Her suite was much smaller than mine, and it didn't take me long to give it a cursory search. I then headed back upstairs, and as I did, I noted through the back door window that Jane's car was gone. What was happening? Was this a joke? Did Jane, having a medical emergency, knock on my door, but then decide to go to the hospital? I called her on a cell phone, and she picked up immediately, stating that she had been at her daughter's house all day, and certainly didn't knock on my bathroom door. I made up some excuse as to what it could have been, and hung up. Looking at the clock, I decided I didn't have time to investigate right now anyway. I got back into the shower to finish shaving, and no sooner had I picked up my razor than the knocking came back, this time much more loud and frantic. In my best cop voice I yelled, "What the F do you want?" My cursing seemed to placate the knocking for a second, but it soon came back, and this time it was so loud that it shook the mirror on my shower wall. Now I was mad. I was sure that someone was playing a joke on me, and I wanted to finish my shower. As quietly as I could, I got out of the shower and wrapped my towel around me. I crept up to the door and could see that it too was rattling with the force of each knock. Taking a breath, I grabbed the door handle and threw the door open with as much force as I could, hoping to scare whoever was on the other side. Nothing. No one was there. I expected to see a friend standing there laughing at me in my towel. I looked into the hallway and then searched the entire house from top to bottom, including Jane's suite. Every place that an adult human could hide was empty. After my search, I started to contemplate the possibility of the paranormal. There had always been unexplained noises and shadows in my house, but nothing that couldn't be explained away. Until now, that was. Nevertheless, I still had to get ready for work. I dried off, finished shaving with the bathroom door open, grabbed my coffee and jumped in my car. The house had a rear driveway that backed onto an alley, and my route to work dictated that I back out of the alley and drive on the street in front of my house. As I did so, I looked one more time at the large bay window overlooking the street. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a dark human shape parting the normally closed curtains, looking out at me. I couldn't detect any facial features, but I do know that the shape was human and very dark, and it appeared to be holding the curtains open whilst looking at me. I slammed on the brakes, threw my car in park and jumped out and sprinted towards the front of my house. I unlocked and opened the door in one motion and charged into the living room, certain I was being taunted by an intruder. Again, being a cop, I was ready to deal with whoever was in my house and had the nerve to make it so obvious. And again, no one was there. The house was dark and empty, just as I had left it moments ago. Another search turned up nothing. The back door was still locked, and I don't believe that anyone would have had time to make it from the living room to the back door and lock it by the time I had made it from the front road to the living room. Not finding anything and really needing to go to work, I locked the house and went back to my car. I don't know what was in my house that day, and I don't know if it was playing a trick on me or if it just wanted to leave. The weird corner of my eye sightings continued, but I did not have another experience quite as pronounced as that for the rest of the time that I stayed in the house, until the night after I had moved out and began living with my soon-to-be wife. It was about 2100 hours, and I was just unpacking the last of my belongings, which I had moved into my wife's much larger home, when I received a frantic call from Jane. She was crying and asked me to come over immediately. I jumped in my car and took the 20-minute drive back to my old house. She was still living in the basement suite. Upon arriving, I found her in her suite, almost hysterical. Through her sobs, she had told me she had been watching TV when she heard what sounded like a party going on upstairs. She described what she thought were multiple people stomping around and crashing about in my now empty suite. Feeling that the house had been broken into, she had been too afraid to investigate, so had called me. As I spoke, I suddenly heard exactly what she had described. Loud footsteps and crashing sounds were emanating from upstairs. These sounds were unmistakable to me, and sounded as if they were coming from what had been my living room. Jane stated, "See? That's exactly what it sounded like before." Furious, I jumped up and ran upstairs, shouting "Police" as loud as I could. I reached the closed door, which separated my old suite from the rear common foyer to the house, grabbed the knob, thrusting the door open as forcefully as I could. In the instant that I was able to see the suite, I noticed that it was empty and in darkness. This was a fleeting glimpse, however, as the door quickly slammed back in my face, sending me falling backwards down the flight of 3 stairs from the suite to the back door. I should note here that the door was a free-swinging door, and in no way was able to close on its own, let alone with the force required to throw a 200-pound man backwards. Recovering from the shock of my fall, I leapt back up, vaulting over the stairs and reopening the door, this time putting my entire body into the effort. There was no resistance to the door this time, and it opened freely. The suite was indeed in darkness and completely empty, just as I had left it the day before. The party appeared to be over, as there was now no sound, and nothing was amiss. There was nothing to be amiss, and there were no signs that anyone had been in the suite since I had left. As per usual, I had searched the suite from top to bottom, finding the front door locked and all the rooms and closets empty. I returned to Jane and told her what I had found, or what I hadn't found. I didn't, however, tell her of being pushed down the stairs, as I felt this would feed her already near hysterical state. Jane elected to spend the next week with her daughter as she contemplated moving out, and I returned to my new home. Jane eventually moved back in, and we have spoken many times since. She has told me that since that night she has had no more strange experiences, and that the new upstairs tenants, whom she speaks with regularly, have not mentioned anything out of the ordinary. Again, I don't know if the 2 events in the house are related, but whatever caused them was very strong and very capable of making itself known when it wanted to be. The music for today's podcast came from the musicalley.com website. The bandwidth was provided by TalkShoe at www.talkshoe.com. And the show notes for today's episode of Mysteries Abound can be found at www.origins.info. And remember, Origins is ORIGINZ. And a big thank you to our listener from Canada who provided us with 2 of the stories for today's podcast. Your contribution is greatly appreciated by myself and, of course, the listeners to the podcast. Both were quite hair-raising tales. So until next time, everyone, whether it be Mysteries Abound or Origins, this is Paul saying bye for now.